Hello everyone and welcome back. And now we've done the tongue, so I'm going to go on to the teeth. I think I'm going to draw the teeth first, and then we'll go to the gums around and then see how far we get, and then work up on the sides of the gums as well. So I'm just going to get my colours ready. Now these teeth are very, very bright white, but as we know with white you get lots of other colours and shadows in them as well. Now I'm looking at the reference and I can see lots of creams as well going on. So I think I am going to start with the buff titanium pencil. So that is the Luminance pencil. And I think I'm also going to use the Ivory Polychromos and the Warm Grey one as well. Is this the warm grey? Yeah, this is the warm grey one. So I'm just going to sharpen these a moment. So now I've sharpened my pencils. I'm just going to erase some of the graphite lines of the teeth. Very, very lightly, so we can just about see the graphite lines as our guides. Now with teeth we want to make sure that they still look three-dimensional, so we really want to pay attention to where the shadows and highlights are. So I'm going to use the buff titanium. We're going to start on this tooth first. I just noticed as well, looking at the teeth, you've almost got sort of like a pinky reflection in them as well. So I'm going to just put a base layer of this buff titanium onto the teeth. Again, just using light pressure and circular motions. So I've coloured the whole tooth now with the buff titanium. What I'm going to do is do an extra layer where I can see is a little darker. So it's just around the edge of the tooth here. And then just on that section as well. And now I'm going to use the Ivory Polychromos pencil just to add a little more of the yellowy tones in. And then I think I'm going to add a tiny bit of the warm grey one, just as a little extra shadow, just slightly at the bottom of the tooth, and a little bit up the edge here, very lightly. And I can see there's like a very slight orangey tone. So I'm going to use, when I can find it, this is another Luminance pencil that I like to use. This is the Burnt Ochre 10%, which is a nice sort of creamy orange tone, but it's very pale. I'm just going to add that around the edge, just for a little more colour into the tooth. And then right where the gums are, there is a bit of the pink reflecting in. So I'm going to look at this swatch sheet that we use for the tongue and try and pick out a colour. I think we're going to use a tiny bit of the salmon. So just down here. And then sort of blend it up into the tooth as well. And then I'm also going to use it for the gum in between those two teeth, because it sort of blends in. I'm going to do it down there as well. And then I'm going to use a little tiny bit more warm grey, just to enhance the sort of deep shadow over there, and the shadow around the edge of the tooth. And then to blend these together, I'm going to go in with my white pencil, just like we did with the tongue, to sort of make it nice and soft and smooth. So that's about as much detail as I'm going to do for the teeth. I think what I'm going to do, just to enhance it, is darken this shadow. I'm going to use the Caput Mortem colour for that. And it's just sort of like going around the tooth to define the shape of it. And then blend and soften that line into the tongue. Just like that. Make sure that curve is nice and smooth. There we go. And then we'll sort of define the tooth on this side when we get to the gum, and we make the gum dark, and then this tooth will sort of pop out then. So now I'm going to move on to the rest of the little teeth. And again, I'm just going to use the buff titanium pencil as a base layer for all of the teeth now. And I'm going to look where the darker tones are. So at the bottom of the teeth, I'll just add like an extra layer. Actually, looking at the teeth now, these ones are quite warm toned, and this one is warm toned. And as we get to the front 3 or 4 but they're more cooler tones. I can see like more of a coal grey coming through. So I think what I'm going to do actually is work on this tooth. So I'm going to add the base layer, and then I'll sort of judge how yellow and how blue these front ones are going to be. So on this tooth, this side was the darker shadowed area, but on this tooth it's on this side. So I'm going to make sure this side is a little darker. And then we've got a really deep pink shadow on the tooth there as well, which we're going to add in. So I've used a harder pressure on the edge but there where it's darker. And then as we come out to the tooth, I've used a lighter pressure. I'm going to add the ivory Polychromo, just to add a little more of that yellow. And then just like we did with this tooth, add a tiny bit of the brown ochre 10% luminance pencil, just slightly, just to add that teeny hint of colour to the tooth. And then I just want to define it a little more, so I'm going to use the brownish orange, just like we did in the shadow of the tongue, just to clean these lines and just make that tooth pop a little. And I'm going to add a bit of the warm grey one, right at the base of the tooth. And up the side. And then we want to get that little pink shadow, so I'm using the salmon pencil. Just to get that little bit in there. And I'm going to add a tiny bit more of the warm grey here. just so I can see a little bit of a shadow. And then blend it all with the white pencil again. There we go. Now I'm going to use the buff titanium on this one because I can still see a little bit of creamy sort of colour. So again, same method for the other teeth. Harder pressure in the darker areas and lighter pressure in the light areas. And then go in with the warm grey right at the base of the tooth where the darker shadows are. And then there's also like that little bit of shadow just before the edge of the tooth as well, which I'm going to add in. And add a little bit of the brown ochre 10% as well. And I'm going to add a very small amount of the buff titanium in the next tooth. Just a light layer, and then I'm going to use the cold grey as well. More in the centre of the tooth and towards the left edge. I think I'm also going to add a little bit of it into this tooth as well. And I'm going to add a bit on this tooth, just at the base, for a little more shadow. And then use my white to blend this out. Like I say, we're not going to put too much detail into the teeth. I just want to get the colour in them, and then when we shade around, then they'll start to pop out. Just going to add a little bit of warm grey, just to define a little shape there. And then buff titanium again for the next one. Just a small layer of it. And then the coal grey. So it's coal grey one and warm grey one I'm using. Can't remember if I previously said. And that one's got like a little dent going down. And buff titanium again, so I'm just repeating. Coal grey one in this little dent area that I can see, and at the base for the shadow. And I'm going to start with a coal grey there on this one, where I can see the really deep shadow. Just there and around the edge. And then use the buff titanium. And I'm going to use some of this coal grey on this tooth here, right at the base, where there's more shadow. And there's a little bit of shadow just on the edge there as well. And then we do have a very subtle pink shadow at the base of the teeth as well. I'm just going to sharpen this pencil. So I'm using the salmon one, and I'm just very lightly sort of working on the gums now, and then bringing it into the tooth where the colour of the gums is reflecting onto the teeth. very subtly. So I'm going to use this in between all of the teeth. And where I'm using in between the teeth and then putting it over the bottom of the teeth, just for it's reflecting. And I think I'm going to blend that with the light flesh pencil just to make it a little lighter. Just going to sharpen it. And now I'm going to add a little bit of the flesh pink around the outside and start looking at the gums there. I'm actually going to go with a coal grey too, I think, and start adding a few more shadows. I think the teeth need a little more shadows before I carry on with the gums. I'm just going to add it around the edge of the teeth. I may even use a darker coal grey again. Yeah, I think I do need to go darker actually. I'm going to use this coal grey 5. But I'm going to use it very, very lightly. Yeah, I think that's really helping the teeth to sort of stand out now. It's also helping to mute the pinks a little bit because the gums are not bright pink. They're sort of a darker pink. So I'm just using it very lightly, and then I'll probably go in with the white pencil to try and blend it and make it softer. I think while I'm here with the coal grey as well, I'm going to start adding that line at the bottom of the gum in. Just lightly. I'm going to leave these ones, there's not as much shadow on them teeth. I'm just going to use the white to blend that out. And I'm going to use the warm grey to further define these teeth. So I'm just using a harder pressure. There we go. I'm just adding a little more shadow here and up the side. There we go. So now I'm going to use the salmon pencil to do the gums on this side now. Use it very lightly. And then I think I'm probably going to use the white pencil to lighten it a little bit. The light flesh pencil is more got orangey tones, whereas this needs to be quite pink. What I'm thinking now is these teeth need a few little highlights, so I may use my Tombow mono eraser to bring some whites back into them. So I think they look a little bit dull now. So I'm just going to get my mono eraser. So just add in a few little highlights with the eraser now. And then I'm just going to use the white pencil to sort of blend them all together again. So we've got a nice smooth finish to the teeth. And I'm just going to go in with the warm grey one just to further add a few shadows and just define the teeth a tiny little more. Now I'm going to go on to the gums underneath, and I'm going to use the brownish orange Pablo pencil, and I'm using this right next to the teeth where they sort of join into the gums as the shadow area. And I'm only using it lightly. And I'm also going to use the brownish beige as well. Just going to sharpen it. I'm just looking at sort of the dark shadows in the gums, and then adding in the line where the gum ends as well. And I'm going to use it on this side of the teeth as well. Now, just like when we're drawing white fur, I tend to use the shadows to define white areas rather than focus on the white area itself, if that makes sense. So rather than paying attention to lots of detail within the teeth, as long as I put the shadows around the teeth, it sort of makes the teeth pop out. Just like when I add the shadows, the darker area around the tooth here, this tooth will stand out more, and so will this one. So I'm going very slowly and carefully, making sure I'm not going too dark or too thick with the sort of shadowed outlines. You always want to make sure when you're going around with shadows, you're only doing the shadow and not sort of outlining areas, because then you're not going to get that realism in. You never want to outline your portraits, but you want to create the shadow. So now I'm going to go back with the light flesh Polychromo and just add a base layer of it down here, and then work on top with the darker tones. I'm going to go in with the salmon now, and just go up with my darks now. So starting with my lighter tones, and then go into my mid-tones, and then go into my darker tones. I'm looking at all the shapes I can see in the mouth and replicating them. So we've got a lot of red tones just on the back of the teeth as well. So I'm going to use the light cadmium red. I'm only going to use it very lightly, I don't want it too red. So what I'm going to do is put a small amount on and then blend it in to the pinks then. We've got just a little bit of red here and in the gums there. So now I'm going to focus on the dark areas under the tongue. I'm going to use the brownish beige first. I'm just going to further darken that shadow under the tongue and then bring it out. You can see this area here, the tongue is quite dark. We have lots of different shapes going on in the mouth. Just by here, you got like little dark patches. But I don't want to focus too much on the detail. Just add in just enough without sort of taking the attention away from the rest of the portrait and onto the teeth. Yeah, I'm going to use one of the browns, the Van Dyke brown, just to further darken that area a little bit. And I'm going to lift this with the mono eraser. It's gone a little too dark there. And go back in with the salmon. And add just a little bit of the brownish beige, sort of a weird shadow on the tongue there. There you go. And I'm going to use the cinnamon pencil, shading the rest under the tongue. And around in the gums as well. Now I'm going to use a warm grey pencil and just further darken some of these little patches that we got going on, and just give a little more depth. Now I just want to blend the shadow under the tongue into the tongue, so it's not a harsh line. So just using the light flesh pink, a circular motion just to blend that. I'm going to go in with a warm grey again, and I think I might use a darker grey as well, just to really get some shadowed areas into these gums. So I'm going to use a brown. I'm going to use the Pablos umber pencil, just to darken a few areas a bit further. And then I'm going to use, I want a dark red. I'm going to use the Caput Mortem actually, and just add this into the gums as well, and further darken a few areas. And then I'm going to use the white pencil to blend and soften it all together. And I just want to further darken these gums. I'm going to use the medium flesh pencil. I'm just going to sharpen it. Just in a few areas of the gums. And then use the cold grey just to tone it down a little and sort of define the edge of the teeth. And then go in with the warm grey again. So I'm always going back and forth, sort of darkening as I go and judging my values. So like I say, instead of going dark straight away, I sort of keep coming back and gradually darkening. And I think I'm pretty happy with how the teeth look now. I'll possibly come back to them once I've added the gums, the edges as well, just because then I can better judge the values and tones. So now we're going to move on to the gums and lips around the edge of the mouth. So I'm going to start on this side first, and it's very, very dark. So I think I'm just going to go in straight with the dark sepia down here. Actually, I've just noticed in the gums that there's a few little highlights to try and make it look wet. So what I'm going to do is use one of my slice tools. I'm going to use the craft knife, and I'm just going to take a tiny, tiny amount off of the pencil pigment just to add in a few highlights to the gums to sort of give that wet look. So literally just drawn 2 little dots there on that gum. I'm trying to see if there's any more. There's a tiny little bit just down here. There's a tiny little bit on the cusp there. And a little down here. And just by adding these tiny, tiny little details, it really helps to give that sort of shine effect to the gums. Make them look a little more wet. And then there is a lot of that going on at the bottom here, but once we've got the pencil in, then we'll go ahead and add the shine as well. So now we're going to go on to this area. So I'm going to go in with the dark sepia. So I'm going to focus on this area. I know we've got the cusp there, but I just want to get this gum in first. So I'm just going to go straight with the dark sepia because it is a very dark area. And I'm not worried about getting any texture in. I just want to get the rich, dark sort of tone. So I'm looking at the shape. There is a bit of highlight going on, so I'm just looking at that one shape there. So I'm just adding that in. Oh, I did press quite hard there to try and get it nice and dark and even. And then I'm leaving that little highlight that I can see just there. So now we're starting to add in the dark tones around the mouth. This is when we'll start to see the mouth sort of pop in alive. I'm going to go very light on this area because there are a little bit of brown tones. So I'm just going to put an undertone of brown on that area. So I'm just going to draw around it just so I've got the shape marked in. So up to between these areas I'm going to do quite dark and then sort of gradually fade it out. So I'm just going to fill this section in. And I'm looking at those little highlights and just shading that in. I'm just going to only just sort of let it show through, just like it is on the reference, and then I'm going to use the slice tool, I think, to create those tiny little details that I can just about see. And I'm also going to flick this dark area into the muzzle so we have that effect of the fur coming into the mouth. So I'm just flicking up. What I'm going to do is, so I use the swordfish icon sharpener to get my pencil nibs really long. So it's great for when I'm doing base layers and need to cover a quick area, a large area quick. And then if I want really fine details, I'll then use the trio pot just to quickly add a very sharp point to the pencil. And then I'm using it just to get very fine lines to flick into the muzzle there. Just to create that sort of texture of fur coming into the mouth. And now I'm going to use the Umber Pablo pencil as an undertone for the rest of the mouth by here. Just to add a slight brown tone to it. And then go over with the sepia. And again, I'm still using that circular motion I mentioned to get it all nice and smooth. And I'm going to look at this area. This has got sort of a bluish tone to it as well. So I'm going to go in with the coal grey one first. I'm just going to add a base layer of that. And then go in with a warm grey and just start adding a few shadows up into it. And there's not much detail on this tooth area. We're just going to add in just a little bit. And then, like I did here and over here, I'm just going to flick the pencil into the muzzle to create the effect of the fur coming down. So it's not a straight edge, so it looks more realistic. And then go back with the coal grey one and just blend it all again. I'm going to use this coal grey one just to lighten that little highlight here. And then use the craft knife, the slice one, and add a few little dots. Just to get that wet look onto this part of the gum. There we go. And now I'm going to go on and use the Luminance Raw Umber 10% now. I'm just going to do a small base layer just on this area. I'm going to remove some graphite. Just for the rest of the gum, because we've got that sort of highlight area which I want to use to come through when we add the darker tones on top. I'm also just going to go around the edge of this gum and soften it with this colour as well. Just because we got a little bit of a highlight coming off the edge of it. And now back in with the dark sepia. And use it lightly first. And it sort of comes down making those little groove shapes. And then go around this tooth. I'm just looking at all the different shapes I can see now. Rather than looking at it as a gum, I'm just looking at sort of all the shapes, drawing what I can see rather than what I think I can see. And then more often than not, it makes sense once you sort of stand back and look at what you've drawn then. I'm going to use a lighter warm grey. I'm going to use a warm grey 5 now, just to blend that area. And then the warm grey 1 to blend the highlights into the rest. And then back with the sepia, I'm just going to sharpen it. Just to further define some of the areas. So it is quite dark around the edge of the tooth. Just adding a few lighter areas with a warm grey. And I'm going to go back in with that brown that I used just to further blend this out and get everything looking nice and soft. There we go. And now we're going to move on to this area here. So I'm just going to look at the colours. There is sort of like a bluish tone with a few pinks reflecting in as well. I'm going to start with this brown just in the shadows of the teeth, so I'm just going to sharpen it. And I'm going to go around here. I'm also going to add down here. I remember I said I was probably going to go back in and darken a few areas once I've got this dark. There we go. I think I'm going to go in with some pinks first and then build up with some coal greys on top. I'm going to do the salmon pink first, but I'm only going to do a very light layer. So again, I'm using that circular motion. I just want to get a nice even coverage of just this sort of bottom lip section. I'm going to bring it up here as well. Down here we got more browns, but there is some pink showing through, so I'm just going to put a little bit of the pink in as well down here. Right, so that's about as far as I'm going to work. As I'm looking at this tooth now, I can see that that needs defining a little bit, so I think I'm going to use a nugget pencil, which is like a very dull light brown colour when I can find it. So I'm just going to use the nugget pencil just to define this just by here. And go across this sort of lip line area and down the outside of this tooth. I'm going to use under the tongue as well. So it kind of looks like I've outlined it, which I have basically, but just for now. But this will sort of blend into the rest of the mouth. So I'm just going to softly blend it. This worked as a shadow, and I'm just also going to use it around the edge of these teeth as well. This kind of helped the teeth to stand out a little bit. Here we go. Right, now I'm gonna try and decide whether to work on this area or this area first. So probably work this area first actually, and then work my way up. But this area is quite dark with a few pinks showing through. Just gonna remove some graphite. I'm gonna add some of this pink up here. Very lightly. There's lots of sort of tiny little details and textures going on at the edge of this lip. I'm going to go in with the Coal Grey 5 now, and start adding in where I can see the darkest tones. So you can see I'm working lightly first, and then I'll slowly make it darker as we go. And I'll probably use the slice tool to pick up all the little details, like all the little highlights. So I'm going to soften the edge around this lip, and then leave areas of the pink showing through where those little highlights are. So it gets down just before the third tooth, it starts getting lighter, so I'm just going to shade as far as there for now, and then darken under here. So I'm looking at all the different sort of shapes and textures going on. There's lots of different lumps and bumps sort of going on in the lips. So now I'm going to use a darker colour. I think I'm going to go for the Payne's Grey, which is like a very dark navy blue, but more sort of muted, more like a greyish. It's like a coal grey, but with a little bit of blue tone in there as well. So this is the Payne's Grey. And I'm just going to darken this area. So I'm not using too much pressure. Still going quite light because we might need to further darken. So I still want to be able to get more layers on top as well. So I'm still using that circular motion. I'm looking at the shapes so that the pink is showing through as well, and making sure I leave that area out. I'm just sort of going to outline this area with the Payne's Grey, because I know this is quite dark until it gets to about there, and then it goes to more of a brown colour. So I'm just going to shade this upwards. And I'm going to go back with the salmon pink and just add in a more pinky areas. And I think I might use the white as well to sort of lighten the pink a little bit. So it's more of a paler pink rather than a bright pink. Now back with the Coal Grey 5 as it comes out lighter here. And there's also a few creases in the lip. So just before the fourth tooth, there's a little crease by here, and then just after the second tooth. There's also a little bit of warm grey, I think, showing through as well. The more I look, the more I can sort of see other tones as well. So I'm going to go back with the Payne's Grey and darken by here. And back with the Coal Grey. I think I'm going to use a lighter Coal Grey because it does start getting lighter around this area. So I'm going to use the Coal Grey 3. So just lightly shading this over now. And then sort of blending it into these areas. So I'm looking to see as far as this Coal Grey goes, and it gets just as the last little tooth ends. And then there's that little highlight underneath, so I'm just going to leave that out. And then I'm also going to add in some of the warm grey. Now you can sort of see the pink tone just underneath this Coal Grey. So I'm going to add a warm grey 3. just over the top. Again, with the circular motions, it's nice and smooth and blended. I'm also going to try and soften that line out. I'm going to go in with a cocoa pencil, which is a Pablos pencil. So this cocoa pencil is a Pablo one, and it's a very nice brownish grey colour. And I'm just going to use a little bit where I can see some more browny grey tones, and then I'm also going to use it to soften the line of the lip. I don't want it to look outlined, I just want it to look like a shadow. So just looking away at the creases in the lip are, making sure I'm adding them in. And just after the crease of the lip is where it starts to get a little more browny tones. Go back in with the Cold Grey 3 and just blending this. I may go in with a slice tool and add some highlights as well. I'm going to use the Cold Grey one actually to add some highlights first, so I don't go too harsh. I'm just going to add where the highlight of the creases there and there. And just in by here too. And now where it starts getting sort of to the brown tones, I'm going to use the Nugget pencil. So I'm going to start at the base here and blending it into those layers first and then bringing it out. I'm using it lightly first with that circular motion. And this brown sort of carries on at the mouth, so I'm just going to sort of map that out for myself a second. Just to see where that ends. So it sort of goes all the way up that side of the mouth. I'm going to lightly bring it up. And then we've got more red tones coming in here as well. So as I'm working on other tones, I'm still looking and judging all my other tones as well. There's more darker pinks in here, so I think I'm going to go in with the medium flesh now. So this is the medium flesh pencil, and I'm just going to blend it in. And then using the light flesh just to blend it out and soften a few areas. And I'm going to use that red that I've been using, the light cadmium. And just very lightly putting a small layer around the edge of the tussle where that bright red area is. And then use the medium flesh to sort of blend it out. Now you can see there's lots of like highlights and stuff, but I think I'm going to leave them for now and go in with the slice tool to add them in. And now another colour I'm going to use is the brownish orange, that Pablo pencil that we've been using. I'm just going to use that up here. I always find this colour is a great colour for gums, when you have that like brownish pink sort of gum colour. Okay, so my memory card ran out of space, but I'm back now. So now I'm going to just add in a few highlights with the craft knife now. So there's these highlights where I'm just going to enhance a little bit. And a few little dots. So adding in these sort of tiny little white dots really helps to get that shiny, glistening look in the gums and make them look wet. So I'm not using hard pressure, just light pressure, just to take off some of the pencil pigment. And then there's that really harsh highlight by here, which I'm going to get in. So if I want a very bright highlight, instead of pressing hard with a craft knife, I just keep going over and taking the pigment off until there's just enough of it. I'm going to add in a few little more dotted light areas. There you go. I'm just going to go over that bit with the white pencil to really enhance it. When I can see the white pencil, there it is. There we go. And up here as well. And I'm just going to highlight a few little bits around here as well. And then use the white pencil again just to go over and soften it. Here we go. And I'm going to carry on further up the gum area. I'm going to go in with the medium flesh, I think, just in here, because it's quite dark down here. And then in with the light flesh. And I'm going to mix the light flesh and the cinnamon, because it's like a sort of a browny pink. And then we got the bumps coming up here. So I'm just going to sort of mark out where those shapes are. And then you've got the shadow of the bumps. And then this comes to there. So I haven't actually like drawn in any of the details of the mouth. I'm sort of just going along and adding things in with my pencils as I go. Like majority of this is free-handed. So I'm just going to add a layer of this flesh, light flesh, just on the rest of this here, just so we'll have some pink tones popping through. And then down here, I think I'm going to use the dusky pink colour. So that's the light fast pencil. I'm just going to do a small base layer of the dusky pink. There's a little bit of graphite showing through, so I'm just going to erase that with the mono eraser. Just where I marked out where the shadowed area sort of starts. But because it's darker down here, I'm going to use the flash pink. And then I think the cocoa and the warm grey. So I'm going to work my way up, I think. So I'm going to use the Pablos cocoa pencil. Now there's a little highlight there. So I'm just leaving that gap, that little gap there. I think I may use a bit of nugget as well, because there's some light brown tones that I can also see. So as I'm coming up to the top of the gum, I'm using a lighter pressure, so I've got a lighter tone. So I'm going to add some of the nugget. Again, I'm not using hard pressure, I just want to get some of the colour in. Now I'm going to use that umber pencil, the brown Polychromos, and I'm going to use that for the really dark tones down here, and then probably go in with the dark sepia and a warm grey. I think I'll use the dark sepia in the really dark areas and the warm grey over here. I'm still looking at sort of the different shapes. There's lots of sort of bumps and highlights going on, so I'm making sure to replicate them as well. So I'm going to get the warm grey. Use the warm grey 6. Just going to sharpen it. And then use a lighter warm grey. Use the warm grey 3 just to blend this up here. And a little bit of nugget coming in as well, just to keep that sort of brownish tone. Now I'm going to use a little bit of the dark sepia. And then back in with the umber. And I'm going to use the medium flesh to start getting some of the pinkier tones, because it sort of goes from a gradient of really dark brown into like a pinky brown, and then brown at the top of the bumps again. I'm going to use the cinnamon as well. I'm trying to figure out all the different shapes. So we got the edge of the gumbo there, and we got that shadow, and then that shadow, sort of like that. So there's 1 bump, 2 bump, 3 bump, and that is about as thick as that little shadow, and then it curves down, and then we got 1, 2, 3, and then almost 4 little bumps there. So I'm going to use the umber as a base layer. So I'm sort of mapping out by here all the different sort of areas, just so it's easy for my eye to sort of focus on. So that's the shadow area. So we got 1, and 2, and then it goes up. I'm going to use the nugget as well, because there's a few light brown tones in there. You can see I'm being very rough with this bit, just like mapping out areas. And then I'll define the shapes once I get further along. I'm going to just mark in where those teeth area is. So we got the 1 tooth and then 2 tooth. I'll just shade them in. Actually, I think that just comes down a little further. This is why it's very good to use very light layers, so you can erase any little mistakes you do. I think that's okay for the teeth. I'm just gonna mark under that tongue area with the brownish orange. And now I'm going to use the actually I'm going to go dark with the Pablos brown first in here, and then the sepia when I need it. So I'm just going to sharpen it. There are some dark tones. I don't want to go too dark too soon, as I always say. Now I'm going to go in with the sepia, just going to sharpen it. And then focus on the really dark areas now. And flick the sepia into the muzzle when we get to that area. And darken down here. And now I'm going to work on those teeth. So you can see they look a little yellow around the edges. I'm just going to clean the page, it's a bit smudgy there. So I'm going to go in with the ivory pencil first, the Polychromos one, and just add ivory around the edges. And then use the buff titanium for the rest of the teeth. And now use the warm grey one. Just to add a bit of shadow. And add a tiny bit of warm grey 3 just to further darken that a little. And then use the medium flesh because there's a little bit of sort of like a pink shadow on the teeth, just like they were in those teeth. and then use the white to blend it all and make it soft. And now it does need darkening. I'm going to use the brownish orange. And then I'm just going to go around the edge of the muzzle because it's quite dark in the reference. I haven't done it quite as dark yet. So I'm going to go with the warm grey 3 first. And just start adding in some of that muzzle texture. So I'm just using the flicking motion for the muzzle here. And that tongue needs to be a little darker here. And now I'm going to work on that muzzle a little further once I've done the mouth. I don't want to spend too much time on areas that this video isn't supposed to be focusing on. So I'm going to go with the brownish beige, wherever that has disappeared to again. Here it is, and I'm just going to darken this gum further. There you go. Now I'm going to work on the rest of this area now. I'm going to use the dusky pink just to cover this as the base layer. And then start working on all the different shapes and highlights that I can see within the texture of the gum. So I'm going to use the umber pencil, and just at the top of these little bumps is quite dark, so I'm just going to add that. But then it's also got that tiny little highlight on the edge. So I'm going to keep that teeny tiny highlight. I'm going to use pressure to make it dark there, and then light pressure to sort of blend it to the rest of the gum. And then this bumpy area sort of starts coming around here rather than following up. So I'm just going to keep that going. Just adding these little bumps and then blending them into the gum. And then darken this up here now. And then we got a really big sort of area of dark brown there. And then another one sort of there. So I'm just like roughly marking out where I can see different patches of colour and different tones going on. I'm going to use the dark sepia to start darkening this edge of the gum. And I'm going to use cold grey up here, because it kind of changes tone up here. And then there's lots of the muzzle coming over, so I might use the slice tool to do that. I'm going to mix some warm grey into that as well. I'm going to use a darker warm grey. And there is a big highlight sort of there, so I'm just going to colour around that shape. So I'm just going to keep going back and forth over this area and sort of darkening up, adding in all the different shapes and tones that I can see going on. So it's a lot of just looking back and forth at the reference, and wherever you can see, just putting down on the page. And sort of building up the depth and details as I go. So now I've added in darker tones up here, I can see that down here needs to just be a little darker. And I need just a little more pink, so I'm going to use the medium flesh. And then once I'm done adding all this, you can see like lots of white dots where the gums are wet and shiny. So we're going to use our slice tool to put them in. And I'm also going to use a slice tool to add the little highlight up there as well. Just going to add some warm grey up here, where the edge of that lip is just about showing through, and then add the little flicks to get the muzzle sort of overlapping into the mouth. And also darkening some of these areas. And there's a few lighter areas in here, so I'm just going to use the warm grey one. Just add a few of those lighter areas that I can see. just add these highlights in with it as well. I'm just going to darken the gums a little more again. I'm going to use the cocoa pencil. There you go. And now for the fun part, I really enjoy adding in highlights. So using my craft knife now, I'm going to look to where all those bright white dots are and just add them in. So there's that bright highlight by here as well. And then there's two little dots by there. There's one little dot just after that bump there. And then there's two little ones in there. Now you don't have to be too precise adding in the highlights. It doesn't have to match exactly. It's still going to look like the dog. But you want to make sure you don't go over the top with adding highlights as well. Just going to lighten that. Go around here. And I think that's just about done. I'll probably have a break now and come back to it, and I may adjust or add a few more that I've sort of missed out. But like I've said before, it's always good to give your eyes a break and then come back before saying that something is finished. Or if you're struggling to get it to look right, if you have a break and then come back, you often things sort of like stand out more to you once you've like adjusted your eyes as well. So I think I'm fairly happy with how it looks, but like I say, I'm going to come back to it after a break and make sure I'm still happy with it. But that is how I draw my dog mouths. I hope you've all enjoyed watching. I hope it hasn't been too long and boring. I might make a little time lapse of it for YouTube as well, so you can see it all come together quickly, rather than, I think it's taken me about 2.5 to 3 hours. I'll have to have a look through my filming footage and figure out how long it's taken me. But anyway, I'm going to stop rambling on now. I hope you all enjoyed. Let me know what you think in the comments down below, and I will see you in my next video. Bye guys!